What's up, everybody? Nick O'Dwyer back with you for another episode of the 10th inning. The NFL season is over. The end of the year is here. Playoff time right around the corner, but also the end of the decade. 2020 literally right around the corner. Many of you will probably be watching this within 2020. I hope you guys have a great new year, great decade. Get everything you want. In this video, I will be giving you my NFL team of the decade for the 2010s. If you're interested in other videos, I've already done the MLB, the NHL, and the NBA. So if you're interested, they will be linked down below. Before I get started, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe this video. And let's get started. Before I do start, though, I want to say this will be a longer list. 22 starters, offense, defense, 4 special teams players. So I'm not going to go too in-depth with these players. I'm going to get them tried to move pretty quickly. So let's get started. At quarterback, we have Tom Brady of the New England Patriots, 2010 through 2019. Tom Brady, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, possibly the greatest quarterback of all time, also the best quarterback of the 2010s, a 782 win percentage, the most impressive stat to me. Now, you could argue that Drew Brees belongs here, but Tom Brady's a winner. He's gone to 5 Super Bowls in the decade. He's won 3. That's what matters here. He's a winner. He's what a team needs. Tom Brady, quarterback. 2 running backs will make this list. First one, Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson, Vikings from 2010 to 2016, then played for the Saints, Cardinals, and the Redskins up until this season. So, 9,732 rushing yards, almost 1,000 yards a season. But what really did it for me is he had one 2,000-yard rushing season, which that's very impressive. Not many running backs can say that. He almost set the all-time record, and he won the MVP that season. If a running back can win the MVP, you know they were one of the best ever. That's what Peterson was. Peterson deserves a list on this spot. Now, one running back that might seem a bit odd to some people, LeSean McCoy. Now, LeSean McCoy was never really the dominant running back as a Peterson, as a Le'Veon Bell. But when you go back and look at the stats, LeSean McCoy is probably the most consistent running back of the decade. 10,000 plus yards in the decade, so that's 1,000 a season. He has 6 Pro Bowl appearances, 2 All-Pros. LeSean McCoy is probably one of the more underrated running backs of the decade, but he full-heartedly deserves to be on this team. Now we get into the wide receivers. Wide receivers, it really came down to 3 players for me, and one guy just didn't really do it for me. You'll see why. Calvin Johnson, though. Calvin Johnson, easy choice for this list, even though he retired in 2015. 15.7 yards per reception. That's the most impressive thing to me. 6 Pro Bowls, 3 All-Pros during the decade, and only 6 seasons. 1,964 receiving yards, the most of all time in one season. Calvin Johnson could do it all. He would get triple teamed, and he had 62 touchdowns in 6 seasons. That's over 10 a season. He has to be here. Now, the player that's not here is Julio Jones. Although Julio Jones had a great decade in his own right, I just couldn't see a reason to put him above Calvin Johnson. Yeah, his receptions, his yards, better because obviously he played longer during the decade. But touchdowns aren't there, which that just says a lot. Yards per reception aren't there. Calvin Johnson, one of the greatest of all times, he has to be here. Sorry, Julio. Then my next receiver, Antonio Brown. Whatever you think of Antonio Brown right now, doesn't really matter. All that matters is what he could do on the field for production-wise. He was one of the best on-field producers at the wide receiver that we saw all decade. 13.4 yards per reception, 11,000 plus yards receiving, 7 Pro Bowls, 4 All-Pros with 75 touchdowns. It's hard to beat that right there. Brown was Mr. Reliable for the Steelers. Yes, he had a Hall of Fame quarterback throwing to him, but does it really matter? He was one of the best receivers of the generation. He deserves a spot on this list. Now we move into tight end. Tight end, it's Rob Gronkowski. Did anyone else really think differently? played with the Patriots from 2010 to 2018 during the decade. Rob Gronkowski was the most dominant tight end possibly of all time. You can't really make an argument against it. I'm not saying best of all time, I'm saying dominant of all time. 7,000 plus yards, 15.1 yards per reception, 79 touchdowns, 5 Pro Bowls, 4 All-Pros, 3 Super Bowl rings. A big part of those Patriots teams, Tom Brady's favorite target to throw to. I mean, yeah, you have probably the greatest quarterback of all time thrown you. It's going to help, but Gronk was an animal at all aspects of the game. He needs to be here. Now we get into the linemen. The linemen, a little bit interesting. Out of the 5 linemen, 3 of them came from the same division, and then the other 2 linemen came from the same team. We'll get into what division and what teams those are, but at left tackle, Joe Thomas for the Browns from 2010 to 2017. In his decade, 42 total penalties, 13 holdings, 7 Pro Bowls, 5 All-Pro appearances, and as the graphic said, Joe Thomas was the first NFL lineman in history. That's very impressive. I mean, even though we all know that's a joke, Joe Thomas, one of the best ever to do it. He never missed a snap until he got injured during his last season. After that, he called it quits. Joe Thomas, 100% deserves to be here. One of the best blindside tackles of the generation, of the century so far. Thomas has to be here. At guard, probably the most dominant offensive lineman since he's entered the league, Zack Martin. Zack Martin of the Cowboys, 2014 to 2019. Zack Martin is a huge reason why that offensive line is so good at the run block game and also the pass block game. 17 total penalties, 6 holding penalties, 6 Pro Bowls, 3 All-Pros in the decade, and only 11.5 sacks allowed. Zack Martin is going to be one of the best linemen in the next decade too, but only playing a portion of this decade, he still turned himself into one of the best linemen. He needs to be here. At center, you could have chosen a lot of people for center because center was kind of an open position compared to the rest of the linemen, but I decided to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers center, Maurkice Pouncey. Maurkice Pouncey, you can't really go against his accolades other than Pro Bowls because we all know Pro Bowls aren't really the whole tale of the story. They're biased. We all know they're biased. But Maurkice Pouncey, 23 total penalties, 12 holding penalties, 8 Pro Bowls, 2 All-Pros, 13.25 sacks allowed over the decade. What more do you want from the center? You can't really ask for more. Maurkice Pouncey got to be on this list. At right guard, one of the best right guards since he's entered the league too, Marshall Yanda for the Baltimore Ravens. And if you weren't counting, that is 3 from the AFC North. Marshall Yanda for the Ravens, 2010 to 2019, 32 total penalties, 7 holding penalties, 8 Pro Bowl appearances, 2 All-Pros, 17.5 sacks allowed. Now Marshall Yanda, interesting thing about him was when he was drafted to really be a replacement for Jonathan Ogden once he retired, but he got his start at guard, proved that he was going to be a guard for the rest of his career, turned out to be one of the best guards of the century. Yanda, easy choice here. Finally, at right tackle, now even though he's more of a left tackle, actually played most of his career at left tackle, I couldn't really find too many top quality right tackles that deserve to be here over this guy. Tyrone Smith of the Dallas Cowboys, 2011 to 2019. Now, the difference between Smith and all the other linemen on my list, Smith has a lot more penalties than everyone else. 68 total penalties, 32 holding penalties, 34 sacks allowed. A lot more than any other lineman on this list. But 7-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro. He's one of the him and Zack Martin, some of the main reasons that Dallas Cowboys line is so feared. They are 2 of the best at their position in the game, if not the 2 best at the position in the game. So I couldn't really go against him here, even though the holding and penalties don't really add up to what the others. It's hard to go against him. So Tyrone Smith rounds off the offense at right tackle. Now we get into the defense. At defense, we've had some of the best players, not only of the decade, obviously, not only of the century, but of all time at defense during the decade, because players are getting more athletic. They're getting bigger, stronger, faster, everything you want, and that just leads to straight up dominance on the defensive end. We've seen potentially two of the greatest players at their respective position in this decade on the defensive end. And let's start off with one of them, defensive end, J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt, you can't really make an argument that he's not one of the greatest defensive ends of all time. The only thing that's hurt him a little bit is his injuries. If he never got injured, he'd probably be the greatest of all time already. But he's gotten injured. 96 sacks in his career, though. 158 tackles for losses. That's easily going to be number one when he's done his career. 3 Defensive Player of the Years, 5 Pro Bowl appearances, 5 All-Pros. Need anything else from J.J. Watt? You can't really ask too much of him. Anything more because he's just too good. Now, at the other defensive end position, I went with Khalil Mack. Now, Khalil Mack, why not Von Miller? Well, Von Miller's not a defensive end. That's why. At defensive end, Khalil Mack, you know he split time at defensive end and linebacker, but what really impressed me with Mack is he was great at both. One year he won 2 All-Pros, one at linebacker, one at defensive end. That just shows how much of a force he is on the defensive side. Now, Mack only entered the league in 2014, but he's been such a dominant player that I could not keep him off this list. 61.5 sacks, 397 tackles, 86 tackles for losses, 1 Defensive Player of the Year, 5 Pro Bowl appearances, 3 All-Pros. You can't really go against him in this list, so I did. He's my defensive end, opposite J.J. Watt. At defensive tackle, the other candidate for greatest of all time already, Aaron Donald. Now, Aaron Donald, like Mack, only been in the league since 2014, but Aaron Donald has been the most dominant defensive tackle of the decade. That is not a question. 72 sacks, 117 tackles for losses. Over a third of his tackles have been tackle for losses. Over half of his tackles have been either sacks or tackle for losses. He's an animal on the run game, on the pass game. 3 Defensive Players of the Year, 6 Pro Bowl appearances, 4 All-Pros for Donald. Donald will end up being one of the best of all time when his career's over. But he's just been so good, it's so hard not to put him on this list. So he's the main defensive tackle. Now, at the other defensive tackle, you had a number of options you could really go with. You could have gone with Geno Atkins, Gerald McCoy. I ended up going with Ndamukong Suh. He played for the Lions, the Dolphins, the Rams, and the Buccaneers. Now, at the beginning of his career with the Lions, he was a dominant force in the middle of that line, but anger issues always really ruled him. But still a very good player. 58.5 sacks, 114 tackles for losses, 1 Defensive Player of the Year, 5 Pro Bowl appearances, 3 All-Pros. It's hard to go against those type of numbers. Those are very good numbers, and yeah, not as dominant as Donald, but still pretty darn good. And Ndamukong Suh rounds off that defensive line. Now we get into the linebackers. I only ended up doing 3 linebackers. There will be a big name omitted from the linebacker list because I strictly kept it to 2 outside linebackers and 1 middle linebacker. So, middle linebackers where that name is going to be excluded. You can probably guess one of 2 players. At my first outside linebacker position, Von Miller. Von Miller, more of an edge rusher, obviously. We know he's get to the quarterback, but he is an edge rusher off a linebacker position. 106 sacks in his career, entered in 2011, 496 tackles, 135 tackle for losses, 1 Defensive Player of the Year, 8 Pro Bowl appearances, 3 All-Pros, and add on 1 Super Bowl to that resume. Von Miller, leader of the 2015 Broncos defense when they won the Super Bowl. Von Miller, one of the best edge rushers we've seen all time. Whether you want to play him at defensive end, that's one thing, but he's positioned as a linebacker. You got to put him here as linebacker. And unquestionably, one of the best linebackers of the decade. He's got to be on this roster. Now, at middle linebacker, you got 2 choices here. You got Luke Kuechly for the Carolina Panthers, and you got Bobby Wagner for the Seattle Seahawks. I left off Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner, one of the best players of the decade too, but if I'm only choosing one middle linebacker, I'm going with Luke Kuechly. Sorry. Luke Kuechly has been so dominant in this decade. 18 interceptions, 1,121 tackles, 1 Defensive Player of the Year, 7 Pro Bowls, 5 All-Pros during the decade. Leader of that Panthers defense since he entered the league in 2012. What can't this guy do? This guy's not going to be your get into the backfield guy. He only has 75 tackle for losses in his career, but he'll make the tackles. He knows how to wrap up. He's the leader of the defense. That's why he's got to be here. I make these lists by looking if I'm going to make a real team with these guys. I already have my edge rushers. I need a sure tackler. That's what Luke Kuechly is. At my other outside linebacker position, a name that most casual fans probably will not know, Lavonte David of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, entered the league in 2012, one of the best run stoppers in the league at the outside linebacker position. Not necessarily get to the quarterback type of guy, but he knows how to stop the run. Really good. 1,005 tackles, 116 tackles for losses, 1 Pro Bowl, 1 All-Pro. Now, those accolades don't show how good of a player this guy really is. This guy is a force on the defensive end, a force for any team. Any team would be lucky to have him. This team is lucky to have him. So those are the linebackers. We got through the front 7 now. Now let's get into that secondary. At first cornerback, Patrick Peterson of the Arizona Cardinals. Patrick Peterson, one of the best lockdown corners since he's entered the league in 2011. You can't really do anything wrong with him. 25 interceptions, 83 pass deflections, 8 Pro Bowls, and 3-time All-Pro. There's really not much else you can say about him. One of the best cornerbacks in the league. He's good at zone. He's good at man. He's lost a step throughout his career so far, but he's still one of the best cornerbacks out there. He's on this team. Now, at the other cornerback position, Richard Sherman. Richard Sherman, when he was on the Seattle Seahawks, won a Super Bowl with them. Legion of Boom 2013, one of the best defenses of all time. And he was a huge leader on that team. He's a big reason why defenses are so good with him on it. 35 interceptions, 114 pass deflections, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro, and again, 1 Super Bowl. Richard Sherman, one of the leaders on that 2013 team, and now leader of the 49ers defense as they get the 1 seed going into the playoffs. Richard Sherman, you can't talk about dominance of the decade without Richard Sherman. He's got to be here. 2 more positions left on the defensive side, 2 safeties. We have a strong safety and we have a free safety. At strong safety, I'm going with a guy whose career probably could have been a lot longer if not for cancer, Eric Berry. Eric Berry, 14 interceptions, 51 pass deflections, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro. Eric Berry was the leader of that Chiefs defense until hard times started to come upon him. He's overcome adversity very well. He deserves a spot on this team. One of the best playmakers in the league when healthy. If you guys didn't watch this guy play, go look at some highlights. Eric Berry was one of the best to do it during his time. Now at the other safety position, free safety, the other leader of that Seattle Seahawks defense in 2013, Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas, When he was in his prime, man, one of the best free safeties around. He's not quite in his prime anymore. Still a very good free safety, but man, he was incredible to watch. Such a joy to watch. 30 interceptions, 71 pass deflections, 7-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro, 1 Super Bowl in his career. Just him and Richard Sherman leading the secondary in both 2013 and on this team. Any team will be good. They're both great pass defenders, both very good tacklers for what the position calls for. They need to be on this team. Earl Thomas is the free safety here. So the offense is done. The defense is done. Now we got special teams. 4 special team players. 1 kicker, 1 punter, 1 kick returner, 1 punt returner. At kicker, it's Justin Tucker. He's the best kicker of all time. You honestly cannot make an argument he's not the best kicker of all time. Well, where's Steven Gostkowski? Well, sorry, Tucker's better than him. 265 for 292 and 90.8 all-time field goal percentage. Only player of all time in the 90% or higher. 1 Super Bowl, 3 Pro Bowls, 3 All-Pros to his name. Honestly, could have been an All-Pro, Pro Bowler every single year he's been in the league, but he's the best kicker in the league, bar none. And just like Tucker's the best kicker in the league, best punter in the league, bar none, Johnny Hekker of the Rams. Hekker, a 47-yard average, 43.5-yard average net. 239 punts within the 20-yard line. 4-time Pro Bowler, 4-time All-Pro. Since he's entered the league in 2012, along with Tucker, they've been the best players at those positions. Best special teamers in the league. Hekker is the punter here. Now at kick returner, someone who only entered the league in 2013, but has been a very dominant force at that returner position, Cordarrelle Patterson. Cordarrelle Patterson averages 29.9 yards per return, 7 touchdowns off the kick, 3 Pro Bowl appearances, 2 All-Pros at that position. Probably the best kick returner of the decade, possibly of the century. You can't go against him here. Great speed, great vision, everything you want in a kick returner. Then finally, we have the punt returner, Devin Hester. Yes, Devin Hester only retired in 2016. His top decade, obviously, was the 2000s to 2010s, but it's still a very good returner. 12.1 yards per return, 7 touchdowns, 2 Pro Bowl appearances, 1 All-Pro in the decade. The best punt returner of all time, still had some magic going in the 2010s. Devin Hester deserves to be here along with everybody else on this team. So there you have it. That is the 2010s all-decade NFL team. If you guys disagree with me, you think I'm stupid for my picks, let me know down in the comments section. For the 10th inning, Nico Dwyer, see ya.